Hey guys, Toby Mathis from Anderson Business Advisors, one of the founding partners, and I'm a lawyer who's been practicing tax and asset protection for well over 20 years. Anyway, we've been talking about 3 areas: your practice, your investments, and now we're on to working on your life. This is a series dedicated to the medical professionals out there, our doctors. So I want to go over that last section, which is really your life. And the reason I say this is because there's always tuition that we pay in life. And I know you guys paid your tuition. You either paid it to a school, you paid it to companies in the form of continuing education. Sometimes it's seminars, sometimes it's workshops, whatever. And sometimes it's just hard knocks. There are people out there that somehow got through without having to pay a lot of tuition to schools, but they had to pay it in other forms. There's always a price you pay. And I'm not going to rate them on a scale of which one's better than the others, but we all pay a combination. Some of us pay more in hard knocks. It's the old Nike adage of just do it, right? We pay more in that than we might have paid in school tuition, but regardless, we all pay a price, and medical doctors pay a significant price because you have to go to school for so long. And the reason I say that is because all of that intangible benefit is what goes into your legacy. And if you do nothing and all you do is say, I'm going to opt for whatever the norm is, I'll do a will, or I just won't worry about it. And it's good, my estate, if something happens to me, goes through probate, or if I'm disabled, c'est la vie. No, you want to be in control of your legacy and what you're leaving behind. There are certain things that are absolutely inevitable. There are certain things that are more likely than not. So for example, inevitable is you're going to die. We know that's going to happen, so you should absolutely positively prepare for that inevitability. It's more likely than not that if you get over 60 years old that you're going to need long-term care, so you should prepare for that. And then there's there's things that could happen during my lifetime. I better make sure that I have something covered. So for example, if you have minor children, you might want to make sure that you have guardianship provisions in case something happens to you and your spouse. Right? It's not likely, but you should still prepare for it. It's not likely that you're going to need a power of attorney for financial matters anytime soon, right? But you should still prepare for it, because if you need it and you don't have it, it's too late. If you have it and you don't need it, great. Eventually, I'll need to use some sort of document. So that's your legacy. And that legacy is so critical. And I sometimes pick on the Californians out there. Because California, if you use a will or if you do nothing, in either case, you're going through a probate system, which is where you're going in front of a court. And it's not you, it's probably your family that's having to deal with this. And it doesn't help you at all if you're disabled or something happens. None of this. If you just have a will or if you've done nothing, it is literally you're at the state's mercy. And people will still do that. If you are going through probate, in California, it starts at 8%, 4% to the personal representative and 4% to the attorney. And then there's a scale that starts to scale down. But let's just put it this way. It's extremely expensive versus creating a legacy, a plan for your estate. It's actually really simple. It's called a living trust, and it includes a bunch of different documents. It's there to make sure that you have a medical power of attorney. You all know what that is. End of life decisions, advance directive, or living will, depending on your state. You're going to want to make sure you have a schedule of gifts, because I've actually seen litigation over items less than $3. You want to make sure that you have sentimental items and that you're dictating who's going to get them, or you designate someone to make that decision that is not the recipient. In other words, you should make sure you have good people there handling your legacy. And when I say legacy, I do a lot of workshops and I tell people, think 200, 300 years out, not my next generation. Don't do that. More likely than not, your kids, if you give everything to your kids, it won't be there after 5 years. It's about 16% retention after 5 years. Most of your estate somehow, some way will be misspent or misused or go to something else. And then, as with lottery winners, the bankruptcy rate starts to jack up there around year 5. Because they've gotten out of whatever the path that they were on, they moved off to something else, and it's probably not in their best interest. When you create a legacy, what you're doing is you're saying, this is what's important to me. So for example, if your calling is service, then make sure that that is built into your plan. That doesn't mean you just give something to somebody, but it might be that you give them access to something with incentives to serve. So for example, I have a client who really believes it's important to travel internationally and to see other cultures. And they said that there's no way that you could be a greedy person or an unsympathetic person if you travel to other countries and you see it. So they built their legacy, and they're very affluent and very well off. And they said, we want to send our beneficiaries, which could be your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids on down the line. We want to have our estate there for them. And in order to be a beneficiary, they have to leave the country. We will pay reasonable accommodations for them to leave the country for 2 weeks every year. We want it to be different countries every year. So in other words, for them to be a beneficiary, they actually have to travel outside the country, which means that that's not a bad thing. I'm looking at that going, could you be my grandparents, right? Could you put that for me? I would have loved to have that to where, hey, I am actually forced to go experience other cultures. That's pretty fantastic. And that's definitely leaving an imprint that a lot of people don't realize. Another one that folks don't realize goes well is when you create your own charity. And people have weird misconceptions about charities. You could create a charity that, again, is in service of people, even housing, residential assisted living, all these things that we do sometimes as investments can still be sitting in a nonprofit if we want it to be, or it could be for a special cause for you. But if it can actually be an operating charity, and the beautiful thing about charities is they absolutely don't die. They don't have owners. They have controllers. And one of the biggest charities, which you may or may not realize is a charity, is a company called IKEA. And Ingvar, when he sets that thing up, realizes that if he gives all that wealth to his family, there's a good chance they'll sell it off or not know how to manage it. So he broke IKEA in the very beginning, breaks it off, and its control is via different charitable organizations so that nobody can sell it off. They can't break apart his baby, which was IKEA, which is really interesting. There's a ton of those cases. If just for kicks and giggles, go read about Hershey in the Hershey school. Started, 1905. Milton Hershey and his wife passed away with no kids, but they still educate over 2,000 kids a year in Lancaster County. It's worth over $12 billion. You have the Howard Hughes organization. I happen to be in a Howard Hughes building as we speak right now, where it gives over $500 million a year for medical research. It started off as something that Howard Hughes had to do to keep from having the government take control of one of his companies. It's actually pretty funny stories. I won't ruin it for you if you like looking up those types of things. But you start realizing that legacy planning doesn't have to be about just me and my family and giving things over to somebody. I can actually create other types of legacy. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. And I'm just going to explain this in 3 roads. There's 3 roads whenever it comes to tax planning or any sort of planning. There's road 1, which is where all the signs will lead you. And I always use Disney World down in Orlando as an example. If you've ever flown into Disney World or you've flown into Orlando Airport to go to Disney World, there are signs everywhere that will take you to Disney World. And they all take you onto the tollway, and you stop repeatedly and pay tolls. Or now they just kind of take a picture of whatever your pass is on your windshield or your license plate and charge you later, right? There's a road that runs parallel to it, Sand Lake Road, that has no tolls. And if you know to jump off that freeway and just head down Sand Lake Road, you'll get to Disney World without paying it. So there's 2 roads right there. There's a 3rd road that's it's a fictional road, that a straight line. It's like the Autobahn. You can drive 100 on it. Has no any imperfections on the road. It's just smooth. It's just perfect. No potholes. There's no traffic. And every couple miles they stop you and throw money in your car. That's the road of tax-wise, folks. And one of the most beneficial entities that's floating around out there that you can create. You don't own it, remember. You just create it and you put it into motion, and you can actually have your family control it in future generations, is that charity. Because for a doctor, you can contribute up to 60% of your adjusted gross income on an annual basis and write it off. And I didn't misstate that. It's actually 60% right now under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act if you're putting in cash. If all it is doing is funding other charities, then it reduces to about 30%, but it's still a big chunk of my income. I could literally put it into my own organization that is there for my family to run in future generations, and I get a huge tax benefit this year. When you use those two together, and by the way, most people that have made a lot of money are using both. They create their trust for their estate plan, but they also have their charity. And that charity is their friend because it gives them a huge tax relief and a huge incentive to fund it. But also it allows them a vehicle to do all the good that they want to do in the world. And what I've noticed, and I think that if you ever read Andrew Carnegie's The Gospel of Wealth, you'll agree with me, is that when you start receiving blessings, if you start receiving a lot of money, most people want to give back in some way. As a doctor, you're already doing a lot of it, but my experience with my clients is a lot of them want to be able to do what they want to do. They've been working their tushes off for so long. They went through all that schooling. They're always going to do some doctoring, but they would love to be able to do what they want to do as well. And this gives them a vehicle to do that. And I've seen so many extraordinary things done. I've seen people build literally over 1,500 houses for the poor, over 6,000 houses for the poor down in El Paso. I've seen people do workspace, millions of dollars of free workspace for nonprofits. I've just seen some extraordinary things done, all the way from food banks down at the local level, veterans organizations, medical clinics, nonprofit medical clinics. Contrary to popular belief, yes, you can do it. Almost all states still allow that when it's a nonprofit. They treat it just like a professional corporation. So you could still run your practice if you wanted to. You could still set up nonprofit practices and have other doctors come in and work for you. It's endless when it comes down to it. And so I plant those seeds for you, those of you out there who are going to have substantial estates, because most medical doctors invariably make more money than your typical person. Obviously, you've earned it. But on the same token, you don't want to just willy-nilly leave it to chance as to what happens with it. That's not being a good fiduciary. I'll leave you with one story. When I first got into practice, I hung my shingle out right away. I never had an interest in working for other folks. And one of the first cases I had was a guy who could not get representation in Seattle, Washington. And he had lost his leg and had a closed head injury from a massive car accident over two people actually, that had been incarcerated, and they got out, went straight to a bar up on Capitol Hill, got sauced, and then ran him over. No insurance. They went straight back to jail. The only people we had to go after was the bar that overserved these folks, almost $200 worth of alcohol in an afternoon to two people. So clearly they were just, the bar owners were negligent, but they didn't have a lot of assets. So there wasn't anything to get. Well, there was a 4-year period where we were trying to collect on the judgment, which was a sizable judgment for this individual. And then one day we found assets. Actually, one of the owners of the bar had family members who had passed, and they were a member of probate. One of the reasons to use a living trust, by the way, is it's not in the public record. Here, thank God it was in the public record. We could actually see it, and we could go and attach it. The problem was, during those 4 years, my client overdosed on heroin on 3 occasions in Seattle, Washington. My fear was giving that individual money would do one thing, which is make his death absolutely certain much sooner than it should be. Like, I thought that if he received a bunch of money, he would go out and blow it. So my job as his fiduciary was to go talk to the other side, come to a resolution that would give my client more money, which means I took no fee on it. And I said, hey, I have to negotiate to make sure that he goes and gets treatment. And then we built an annuity into this so that he never had to, like, hey, if you die early, John, you lose. So you need to live a really long life. We have an annuity that's paying out until you die. Like, you can't outlive it. You're going to be receiving money, partially because we wanted to make sure he always had money for the continuation of his care. So that was a lesson to me. And I remember those days. I actually went and talked to a judge I clerked for, and I did not know exactly what to do, because I knew that it wouldn't be in my client's best interest to give him money. The reason I say this, guys, is because we never know when that's going to be our grandson or great grandson or our child. We don't know if we're going to dump fuel on the fire. If we're going to give somebody who's in a state in their life where they're vulnerable, and we're going to make it worse. There are tons of stories. And by putting it into a vehicle, by creating a trust where you have a trustee who's now controlling this, who can actually take steps to make sure that individual seeks some sort of assistance, by putting it into a vehicle where the only way to get money out of that charity is to work, and you actually have to work, and you can still get paid a salary, but you have to do the work, then we have protections built in for those individuals who may not be able to handle their own affairs at that time. And so I'm going to leave you with that. We've covered 3 big areas: your practice, your investments, and your life. And I know it's just the tip of the iceberg. I know you're just spending a little bit of time online. So I'm going to give you some directions. First off, our YouTube channel has a ton of specifics on those boxes we talked about. LLCs for real estate, LLCs for investments. There's tons of material on our website that you can go in there and look. We have free podcasts. You can go to Apple iTunes and the iPlay app, and you can go in and get our free podcast. I do something called Tax Tuesday every other Tuesday where you can ask any tax questions you want. There's tons of materials and videos on our site. And of course, you can come to our tax and asset protection course. Please contact us if you would like to attend to be our guest. Because one thing we know about medical professionals is that you guys, when you decide to do something, A, you do it, and B, you're very, very busy. So we respect your time. And so if you're willing to spend it with us for a 3-day tax and asset protection class, by all means, we'll invite you into it. So if you have any other questions, please reach out to us and we will point you in the right direction for the right resource. If you want to talk to somebody at our offices, there's plenty of contact information on this video. And by all means, share this with your friends. So again, we talked about your practice, we talked about your investments, and we talked about your life. If you put a little bit of planning in those 3 areas, you will not be disappointed.